We begin tonight in Iqaluit with the federal government announcing new details of a plan to help Nunavut address its housing crisis. The Prime Minister spoke about the plan during his pre-election tour in Canada's north.
We recognize that this is a big step forward that is going to make a huge difference in creating thousands of homes, and we know this is really going to make a tangible impact in the lives of people here in the north.
The new housing agreement is based on previously announced funding. The federal and territorial governments will work to build housing units and repair existing ones. The money, which is all part of the 2017 National Housing Strategy, will be made available over the next 8 years. Here's more of what Justin Trudeau said about the plan.
We continue to recognize that there's always lots more to do, but our approach has fundamentally altered from previous governments because we start from a position of partnership. We start working with Joe, with Madeline, with others to figure out what their needs are and to be there in support of their priorities, not just directing our own priorities from Ottawa. That's why this is making such a difference right across the country.
The CBC's Sarah Frisell has been tracking the Prime Minister's visit, and she joins us now from Iqaluit. So Sarah, yesterday it was all about the environment. Today it's all about the housing, albeit previously announced funding. So what are people saying about Justin Trudeau's announcements?
Hi, Natasha. So yes, the conservation announcement was very welcome. Iqaluit, which is in Lancaster Sound, and the entrance to the Northwest Passage is something that Inuit have been trying to get protected for 50 years. So it's really nice to have that complete, and it's better still that it comes with training, jobs, and some infrastructure announcement. People are excited about the fact that Arctic Bay and Clyde River will be getting small craft harbors. As for the potential protected area that would be north of Ellesmere Island, at the top of Canada, it's a little early to say. People are generally optimistic, but I was getting a lot of questions at the event. How will this protection stop the ice from melting? We need the ice. It's what gives us the marine life. It lets us continue our traditional way of life. And the announcement, while it stops development in the area, there isn't currently any exploration there. It's all research, and the research is allowed to continue. So, yeah, again, cautiously optimistic, but unsure. What I was also hearing at the event was Trudeau's in town, where's the money for housing? That's what we want to hear announced. And so when Trudeau was on the Hill looking over Iqaluit this morning, it was a little bit just disappointing. It fell flat when he wasn't announcing any new money. Nunavut is obviously in a housing crisis. We need 3,000 more public housing units, and with overcrowded housing, you get things like tuberculosis and it's a stress on people's mental health. So kind of a mixed bag of reaction there. Housing, not so pleased. Conservation, people were generally for it.
Okay, so with these two announcements, seemingly a bit of disappointment with today's announcement on the housing, how do you think all of this is going to translate in terms of support for the Liberals come the fall election?
That's hard to say. I think there was a lot of hope when Trudeau was first elected here in Nunavut. The promises of reconciliation and meaningful partnership meant a lot. And there's also some good infrastructure announcements. So we're getting an addictions treatment center, and that's big news. But there's also been a lot of disillusionment, promises that maybe aren't fulfilled, or things that just aren't working out how people had envisioned. Trudeau was at the announcement for the Liberal candidate last night in Iqaluit. Megan Piso-Lyle is she's young, she's got a lot going for her, she's only 31, and she's lived in all 3 regions of Nunavut, which means a lot when you're in a riding that is 1/5 the landmass of Canada. So she knows a lot of the people. She's worked as a city councillor for Iqaluit and for the territorial government, but she's up against a heavy hitter. Leona Iqaluit is someone that Nunavut knows. She served as a cabinet minister and a voice for Nunavut under Harper's government, his 2 terms, and was present in Ottawa in a way that Hunter Tutu, who was elected a Liberal and is leaving politics as an independent, wasn't able to do. So I think there's a lot of people will be counting dollars and counting election promises closer to the date. So far, only the Liberals and the Conservatives have announced for Nunavut.
Okay, CBC Sarah Frisell in Iqaluit. Thank you, Sarah. Today's announcement was welcomed by residents in Cambridge Bay. The community has long struggled with social problems aggravated by the lack of housing. And as we hear from CBC's Jordan Connick, it's now organizing to build a series of experimental tiny homes.
Cambridge Bay Steering Committee officially dedicated a land for tiny homes, an idea that started with young people who left for college but did not want to come back to Cambridge Bay to live with their parents' overcrowded homes.
Recognizing that the government of Nunavut, doesn't have enough money to actually meet the need and the demand. So we started talking as a community and figured out that if we could bring affordable housing in to meet a lot of different needs.
Limousine says the study and applications to sign up for the tiny homes keep growing, with ideas like transitional homes, social housing, and private homes. Committee member Harry Muksagak says it's important because overcrowding causes mental health and other problems faced today.
So it's critical, it's important, it's urgent. People who are comfortable and well are going to want to contribute within the community. They want to get to work. They want to go and participate in social events. They're not going to be secluded anymore. They're not going to say, oh, nobody cares about me, nobody is not thinking about me. Once they begin to realize there is a way that we can work around this.
Muksagak says the construction of the homes will also be learning skills for the locals. They hope to have one built by next summer as a prototype. An architect will meet with them this fall to see what kinds of homes they can build. Jordan Kunni, CBC News, Iqaluit.
My next guest says that the housing crisis in Nunavut does not have a single solution. So joining us to discuss more on this is the Mayor of Iqaluit, Madeleine Redfern. Madeleine, thank you so much for making time for us this evening. Let's begin with the amount that has been promised. According to the Prime Minister, $290 million to be doled out over the course of the next 8 years to manage the housing crisis in the North. Is that enough money?
We know it's not enough to meet the full needs of the territory, but it is important that we look at how we can maximize that money to build as many houses as possible. We need social housing, but we also need affordable housing, and we need to figure out what those options look like.
So with the $290 million, do you have a sense of how much you could build? Because the numbers we're seeing indicate that there are still roughly 5,000 people that need affordable housing in the territory, that in fact something like 3,000 units would have to be built. So where would you land with this money?
Well, it's important to recognize that there are those that are living on social assistance and they need public housing. At the same time, we know in many of the communities that people who have good income are living in social housing but are unable to leave because there are no options for them. They don't have the down payment to be able to buy or build a house, and they need assistance there. Or that the housing prices, even here in Iqaluit, are just simply out of their reach. A starter home is about $500,000, and that's a big mortgage for people to cover. Vast majority of people are also living in staff housing and with subsidies. And so how do we also help them be able to transition into the private housing market?
Why has this turned into such a crisis, particularly in the North?
Well, probably one of the policies that was decided early on was for government to provide almost $2,000 a month subsidy for staff housing. That instantly jacked up the rental prices in the private sector. It meant that the housing prices to buy a home also went up. It makes people very, vulnerable as well, is that if your job is tied to housing and people are sometimes, uncomfortable, moving even to another type of job if no housing is provided. We need to be able to provide people a lot more flexibility, allow them, the opportunity even to go back to school. Some people don't because, again, their employer may not actually give them education leave and allow them to stay in that house. We're also seeing people retiring from public service after 20 years, and they haven't planned for where they're going to live if they're in staff housing.
Mayor, you mentioned the concept of being vulnerable because of the housing crisis, and we heard from our colleague who's a reporter up in Iqaluit that, in fact, this leads to mental health issues, it leads to physical health problems, specifically she was referencing tuberculosis. Can you give me a sense, as the mayor of the community, what you see, what are the sorts of social and health problems that you've witnessed as a result of this crisis?
Well, in Iqaluit, about 16% of our housing is social housing, and without a doubt, that is where the significant overcrowding is happening. In many cases, you have 2 or 3 or sometimes even 4 generations living in one home. And that can mean anywhere from 8, 12, 16 people in a 2 or 3 bedroom house. It's a pressure cooker. It's very difficult. There aren't enough beds. People couch surf, sleep in shifts. There's not enough often food in that house as well. Unfortunately, it can lead to stress, domestic violence, hopelessness, and suicide, as well as tuberculosis outbreaks or other communicable diseases, because it's not a particularly good or safe situation for people to live in. So that's why we also need to recognize that if we're going to reduce or eliminate tuberculosis in this territory, we also need to provide more housing. If we want to reduce violence and improve health outcomes and education outcomes, we need to provide more housing.
Mayor, we've also heard disappointment today from a number of people watching this story that, in fact, it's not new money that has been promised. It's really something from 2017 that has now been officially announced, presented in the North, and the government is saying that it would be doled out over the course of the next 8 years, leading some to believe it's a reason to vote Liberal. Do you think this issue is being manipulated at this point?
Well, it's important to recognize that the territorial government is very committed to also looking at building affordable housing, not just public housing. And that means, increased number of houses that are going to be built across the territory. So the devil's in the details. Ideally, we also need to see our Inuit organizations be part of the solution. There is over $1.6 billion that Inuit and Nunavut has received as a result of our land claim agreement. It's money that is being played in the stock market rather than actually helping house our people. So there are, I think, opportunities for looking at more creative, more flexible options, the spectrum of everything from public housing to affordable housing, as well as helping people buy or build their own units in their homes is also required.
Okay. Mayor Redfern, thank you so much for your time this evening. Madeline
Thank you.
Madeline Redfern is the mayor of Iqaluit.